Everyone, and welcome to the June 2025 Council Agenda Briefing. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the video and audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted. And councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So that brings us to item 1, which is the declaration of opening. I declare this meeting open at 6 p.m. Items for Council. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held on the 24th of June 2025. That brings us to item 4, which is attendances. Item 4.1 is apologies. I've received an apology from Councillor Bronwyn Moore. 4.2 is approved leaves of absence. Councillor Glenn Cridland is on an approved leave of absence for the period of 15 June 2025 to 17 June 2025 inclusive, but I've just been informed that he's going to be attending, but he's running late. Item 4.3 is parental leave. Councillor Nick Coveney has parental leave for the period of 4 June 2025 to 4 December 2025 inclusive. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Mayor Greg Milner, that's me. I've declared a financial and proximity interest in item 10.3.1. as some of the proposed listings either include or are adjacent to or are across the road from properties that are owned or indirectly owned by persons who contributed to my re-election campaign in 2023. Councillor Andre Brender-Abrandis has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as I know of someone who is not a closely associated person to me and their property is on the draft local heritage survey for adoption. I've had a conversation with Ms Logue last week, an owner of 2 Parker Street, South Perth, with a proposed category 2 in the draft local heritage survey for adoption. The impartiality interests will not impair my decision making, which will be based on merit. And Mayor Greg Milner, once again, that's me. I've declared an impartiality interest in item 10.4.1 as this item potentially affects a number of community organisations that I currently serve as patron or have previously served on the board of or am a member of or am an honorary member of or have otherwise developed relationships with during my time on council. Councillors, does anyone else have any other interests that they wish to declare this evening? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have 2 impartiality declarations to make. The first one, it relates to 10.1.1, 2025 large-scale commercial event proposal on Sir James Mitchell Park, Nocturnal Food and Beverage Village, November 25. And it's an impartiality interest, and I live within sight and sound of the proposed location for this event. I share this interest with many hundreds of residents who also live in the vicinity of the proposed venue site, which is the flagpole area on Sir James Mitchell Park. And I have a further one, really actually based on having had a conversation with one of the concerned residents who is a property owner who has a property listed on the proposed heritage list at 10.3.1. And so I undertake to deal with this matter with impartiality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, any other? Councillor Prendeville?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, like many of us, have an impartiality interest in 10.3.1 as some of the homeowners on the survey are known to me through the community.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillors, any further declarations of interest that anyone would like to make? No. Okay, moving on. So that brings us to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations. And this evening we have 4 speakers who will have up to 10 minutes each to address council. And I'd like to begin by inviting Mr. Brendan Glynn of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome to you, Mr. Glynn, if you'd like to come up to the microphone. The microphone is yours and we look forward to your deputation.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, councillors. I refer to the owners of Strata Plan 6796, and I'm representing that Strata Plan tonight, known as the property 5, 7 and 9 Queen Street. The item is 10.3.1, Draft Local Heritage Survey, and I'm here tonight to support the request of the owners for the removal of the properties from the Draft Local Heritage Survey. On the 2024 proposed new places for inclusion, 5, 7 and 9 Queen Street, known as Place 91, was listed on pages 68 to 72. The picture taken and uploaded by the author to identify our properties was grossly inadequate. It didn't depict the full picture of the building, yet it was the only image presented to the public to make submissions on. The owner of number 9, who I represent here tonight, called this out in her objection as deceptive. I met with Samantha Taylor on Wednesday, 12th February this year, and she apologised, advising she couldn't fit the entire building in the photograph. I appreciated the apology. However, if a true pictorial representation couldn't be made by including only one angled photograph on such a significant issue, such as the adoption of the Local Heritage Survey, then why would an additional picture not be included in the additional photograph section? The 2 prior place numbers, being number 89 at number 9 Onslow Street and place number 90 at 2 Parker Street, both had current alternative elevation pictures included in their additional photographic section. The natural assumption would be the omitted part of our building from the initial photograph would be included in our additional photograph section. But instead of showing the current facade that undoubtedly would have shown our building didn't meet the criteria to be included in the Local Heritage Survey, the author opted to upload a picture in our additional photographic section from 1981, some 44 years ago. Just quick, well, probably better off on the coloured ones. Just a quick indication of the current streetscape, picture of the streetscape as viewed from Queen Street. And the photo that was supplied in the report was this one here. Now, as you see, number 9 Queen Street has been substantially altered. The frontage of the property has been substantially altered. So the point being is that the independent consultant confirmed in their assessment that the streetscape facade was degraded from the original intent, which has reduced the aesthetic value, which we as the owners could have not stressed more in our own personal objections. The subject property does not have substantial historic value, which was also substantiated by the city's consultant, and it should be excluded from any historic classification as outlined by the Heritage Council's guidelines for assessment of local heritage places. There is no reliable, verifiable, physical, documentary or even historical evidence existing to demonstrate the association of our properties with any historical event or phase in the locality, and as such does not warrant inclusion within the review of the local heritage survey. The independent heritage consultant notes, and I quote, that while there are currently no other places of brutalist architecture on the local heritage survey, there are numerous better examples located within the city, and that the nominated place does not appear to be a fine example of this building type, nor does it have substantial historical value. After considering the Western Australian Heritage Council's guidelines for assessment of local heritage places, together with the numerous inaccuracies of the contents of the draft local heritage survey, and including the independent heritage consultant's views, it's clear the property does not contribute to the heritage of the locality and should not be included in the review of the local heritage survey. And we, the owners, request its removal entirely. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation. I'll get you to stay there just for a moment. I'll see if any of the councillors have any questions to ask you. Councillors, any questions for Mr Glynn about his deputation? Councillor Navard.
Sure.
Mr Glynn, I just wondered about the structure at the front of, I think it's number 9, with the what appears to be some kind of a parking arrangement. Is the facade behind that structure still the original facade?
Talking about the garage? The garage at the frontage of the property? So the original facade was removed because it was dangerous to, it was falling down back in, I think it was 2002, and it was deemed structurally not, it needed to be replaced. So that whole section at the frontage of the property was replaced, if that's what you're talking about.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? No. Thank you very much, Mr Glynn.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'd now like to invite Mr Graham Gallop and Ms Helen Logue of South Perth, who are speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Mr Gallop and Ms Logue, welcome to you. Would you like to make your way to the desk with the microphone there? The floor is yours, and we look forward to your deputation.
Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. Yes, I'm fine.
Can you hear okay?
I have seen the mountain of reading that had to be done for tonight, and Graham and I decided that maybe to refresh everyone's memory, it would be timely for me to read the deputation which I presented back in December, and then Graham will contribute his deputation to follow afterwards. So Reasons for our objection to our home at 2 Parker Street, South Perth, being included in the Local Heritage Survey Review 2024, which could ultimately see the property included on the heritage list. On the 3rd of January 2023, prior to auction, we spoke to the City of South Perth Planning Department, who confirmed that the property was not on the heritage list and indeed had been removed from the heritage list in 2005 on the Council's recommendation. And we had an attached item with that. We purchased the property at auction in February 2023, and in the first instance, we would not have bought the property if it was on the heritage list or if there was any prospect of it being heritage listed. We are mindful that our home is located in the activity centre area of South Perth, where the planning framework is designated for high density housing. We are not property developers. We bought the property for our own occupation. Believing that our investment was secure, we renovated the property to become our home. We have since been advised by a local real estate agent that the value of our home will be considerably reduced if it is heritage listed, and there was an attached item to support that. In addition to the reduction in the value of our home, the cost of ongoing maintenance, improvements, and future additions to our home will be impacted greatly by regulations and compliance imposed upon us to meet the standards of a heritage listed home. Earlier this year, we completed a sympathetic renovation. The replacement veranda would have cost 3 times the amount we paid if we had used traditional materials and period design features to meet heritage standards. We understand we can apply for a grant if required. However, we are mindful that it is not a given that an application guarantees an approval for funds to be granted. We are not against the concept of protecting significant heritage buildings, and we enjoy the environment created by some of these buildings in South Perth. The old post office, the police station, the Windsor Hotel, and the Mechanics Institute are all fine examples of Federation architecture. But our private home is not a significant building, which is why it was removed from the heritage list in 2005. Since 2005, there have been other opportunities for our home to have been nominated for the heritage list. We strongly believe that if we had left the house in its existing state at the time of purchase, it would have remained unnoticed during this current review period. The renovation and garden improvements have attracted the community's attention, and as a result, our home has been nominated by people unknown to us. We don't feel we should have our home reduced in value and the ongoing costs of ownership be increased by people who have no financial investment or interest in our home just to satisfy the sentiments and emotions of people in the community. We respectfully request that the property is allowed to remain with its present status, unencumbered. So thank you. Can we move this? Is that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that?
It's okay.
Is that? Oh.
Good evening. Since the deputation which Helen presented last December and just refreshed now, we've gone to some considerable lengths to seek professional advice and have had reports prepared which are included in the agenda briefing. Those reports being done by Heritage Intelligence WA, Planning Solutions and our lawyers Levans. But we thought it was appropriate just to summarise, while we have this opportunity, just to pinpoint what we analyse as being the most significant of those points. No doubt you'll get a chance to read all of those reports, but they're very, as Helen's already said, they're very lengthy. The planning grounds are quite specific and can be summarised briefly, although I'm not a planner, that the property is located in the activity centre, the ACP, as part of local plan LPS 7. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. There is a density code rating of R-AC0 or O. The implication of that is that it's designed for high density residential development with a building height of potentially 15 stories. The amalgamation of our property and the adjoining property number 4 Parker Street could provide
substantial number of homes. I've just put a figure of 60 in there notionally. And this is a lot of housing that could be provided within the high activity zone, which is the intention of the zone. Those houses, obviously, being those apartments or whatever, being within close proximity of the main street and the transport hubs and links to the Perth city. The importance of this is that a heritage listing would blight the planning potential, because both properties, both 2 and 4 Parker Street, would be blighted if this heritage listing goes forward. The second point we want to raise is that the heritage grounds themselves, and as Helen has already alluded to, the property was removed from the heritage inventory in 2006 at the request of the previous owner and on the recommendation of a heritage architect that they engaged. And to quote from the council minutes at the time, the heritage architect said he was suggesting it as there was a change in the local context in terms of the surrounding higher development potential. That is still obviously the case today. The removal from the inventory was then recommended by the planning officer at the time, and there have been those 2 reviews since for the local heritage inventory in 2015 and 2018. And as we previously stated, on neither occasion was the property nominated for inclusion. The third and ultimate point for us is our private property rights. If our property is placed on a local heritage survey and subsequently on the heritage list, we've been advised by local and respected real estate agents the value of our property will be diminished, which is what we stated in the earlier deputation. We've also had that subsequently confirmed. We thought we'd get a second opinion, and Dempsey Real Estate have been to the property and confirmed our worst fears. We live in a property owning democracy, and we have common law rights to protect the fabric and value of our property. Our concern is that this questionable process whereby people in the community with no financial interest in the property can nominate our property for inclusion in the local heritage survey without our consent, leaving us in a position with no prospect of compensation and no right of appeal. This is a blatant disregard of our private property rights. It is for this reason that some councils require the owner's consent before including a property on a local heritage survey or a heritage list. And I bring to your attention an extract from the website of the City of Melville that confirms this. And I'm quoting this from their website, which is obviously available. Under the heading, Nominating a Place for Local Heritage Survey and Local Heritage List. And I quote, "We do a review of our local heritage survey and local heritage list every 5 to 8 years, which is when we call for nominations from the community. We then assess all nominations, and if a place is considered worthy of potentially being heritage listed, we notify the owner
60 seconds remaining, Mr. Gallop.
and seek their consent to list the place on our local heritage survey and or local heritage list." That is the importance of this point, that there are councils in this vicinity that seek owners' consent before going to the heritage survey application. I think if I have run out of time, all I wanted to sum up is, for the reasons that we've stated, and there are a number of them, we would respectfully ask for the property to be removed from the proposed list.
Thank you both for your deputation. I'll just see if any of the councillors want to ask you any questions about your deputation. Councillors? Councillor Navard?
Look, this is just one aspect that I know you'd referred to, and it was talking about common law rights to protect the fabric and value of your property. And I just wondered how you saw that operating and how you would see that playing out in terms of exercising common law rights.
I'm not entirely sure I
Yes,
understand the question.
Yes.
Do you understand
No,
that?
not really, but I guess we would seek legal advice.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Navard. My apologies, Councillor Prendeville.
It's okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your deputation this evening, guys. I suppose I just want to know, I know this has obviously been quite stressful for you both. What do you see as the result if your home ends up on the list, on the survey, and then has sort of certain restrictions placed on it? How do you feel, and what do you see as the end result for you? Staying in your home or something else?
I think we move on.
Well, I think if we really just want to be unencumbered as we bought it, so that the property remains, so we have our own choices as to what we do. Whereas we won't have that opportunity if it's encumbered with a heritage listing. That's the sort of, I mean, in terms of what we would do, I mean, we bought it to enjoy the property, but we do want to have the opportunity, if we at some stage need to sell, to have the opportunity of selling it at the best price that we can.
Councillor Brenda Brandis, a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the deputation. It's appreciated. Just a couple of quick questions. The first one is, you mentioned that you used 3 consultants. One is Levan, the other one is Heritage Solutions WA, is that correct? And a third consultant, who was that?
Planning Solutions and Heritage Intelligence WA, which is Laura Gray.
Okay. Thank you very much. And with regard to the consultation you've had with real estate agents, you indicated that there would be a significant differential in valuation if this was actually ultimately listed as opposed to not listed. Do you have any of those indicative valuation numbers that you could share?
Yes, it's actually in the attachment to the first deputation, and it's in the form of a letter from Hutchinson Real Estate that state that the property as is would have a potential valuation of 3.6 million, but with a heritage listing, is it 2.5?
Yes, 2.5.
2.5.
Yes, 2.5.
Thank you very much.
And as I said, we had a second opinion from Dempsey Real Estate, and they pretty much came up with the same numbers.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any further questions, folks? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you very much.
I'd now like to invite Mr Aaron Pearce of Kensington, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome, Mr Pearce. The microphone is yours, and we look forward to your deputation.
Hello, Mayor, councillors. I haven't had much time to prepare this, so I'm just going to read off this, what I've kind of written down here. It's also relating to 10.3.1, specifically place number 82 residence, Hovia Terrace, which I am one of the resident owners, but that actually encapsulates 24 different residences. I'm speaking on behalf of my house, yeah. I was aware in 2024 that our property was recommended for Category 4 classification. No owners nominated their properties. This looks to be 3 community members without owner consultation. We understood the independent consultant recommended Category 4. That's just speed read stuff kind of over the weekend to try and catch this, but like up until I guess the weekend just gone by, we were unaware that our property and those 24 properties had been kind of upgraded, so to speak, from Category 4 to Category 2. The only notification that we had was a letter that was received in the mail at the latter part of last week. And on the top of that letter, it said June 6th was the date that it I guess, left the council chambers. I've gone back and done a little bit of research, and it seems watching the December council meeting, there seemed to be one individual that asked for these 24 properties to be Category 2. He was not an owner of any of those properties, and he had not consulted any of those properties either. I don't know if there was more than that, but that's the only thing I could find when I looked. The independent consultant then seems to have changed their suggestion from Category 4 to Category 2, which is kind of confusing because nothing's really changed over that period of when they first, I guess, made their assessment and put forward the Category 4 recommendation. The reason, I guess, my wife and I are against this, I guess, change, this motion from Category 4 to Category 2, is the lack of appropriate notice and lack of information provided of such a significant change. I don't know if any of the Hovia kind of owners, 24 of them, have been spoken to directly on this matter. Basic property rights, kind of as you just heard before, we really don't appreciate the fact that someone else, a non-owner, can nominate our home without our permission or our consultation. We didn't have an issue with the proposal of Category 4 when we looked at it at the latter part of last year, but just through looking and researching quickly around going to Category 2, as you just heard previously, there are kind of financial and logistical, potentially significant impacts on us for our family and our family home around everything from renovation to extension work to even kind of minor maintenance. I'm not a builder, I'm not a planner, I don't know the exact cost of that, but they're going to be a lot more than if it is in the current state that we bought it kind of as. But yeah, what I've heard is that works can end up costing double or triple the normal costs. I have to say as well, like we bought this property without this kind of on it, and living is not cheap, and kind of your house is your biggest asset. So for something to be kind of impacted through no doing of our own, and really just someone kind of saying, I would like that old home to be called this, it could have a really monumental impact on our lives. So in conclusion, we find the current situation quite unjust, and it kind of just feels slightly deceiving in trying to rush this through at the end with kind of getting a letter, picking it up, and then kind of seeing what it meant for people that are coming from a place of just not knowing what it actually properly means, kind of thing. So ultimately what I'm requesting, for our property, we'd prefer for it to be unencumbered, or even just go through with the Category 4. That was the original recommendation of the consultant. If the other option is just giving Hovia kind of the 24 different residents more time, maybe to meet with Fiona Mullen or Donna Shaw, a bit of an explanation of the Heritage Act of 2018 and relevant council documents for these changes, because they do feel really significant if they are kind of proposed, and kind of understanding around forecast impact on residents with this change, and to what level council, local government help to cover future property costs to keep in line with heritage listing classification. Yeah, it kind of all just came out of the blue, and I've tried to kind of pull that together quite quickly. And so I appreciate this opportunity to kind of speak to you all about our family home. Any questions?
Thank you very much for the deputation. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Pearce this evening? Councillor Prendiville.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr Pearce. I'm just wanted to ask you about the general sort of feel amongst your neighbours. Obviously, most of you have maybe spoken to each other about the letter that's been received. I know you speak for your home and your family, but how are the other residents sort of feeling? Have they all sort of expressed that same sort of stress and doubt about this new categorisation?
Yeah. So funnily enough, they have a WhatsApp group called the Hovia Hotties that I have not been invited to, but Yeah, it seemed like it was a fair bit of a surprise, and I can't speak for everyone on that street, the 24 different kind of owners, but there was a significant amount of people that were quite upset and surprised by it. I think a lot of people assumed that the letter, if they did get it, going from Category 4 to Category 2, was kind of just stating what it stated in 2024. So like we saw what it said and then reached out to people, and I think if we hadn't done that, this could have just slipped through completely unbeknown to anyone. So yeah, it was quite a surprise to a large number of people.
Any further questions, councillors? No. Thank you very much for your deputation, Mr Pearce. I'd now like to invite Mr David Lee of Kensington, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome to you, Mr Lee. The microphone is yours, and we look forward to your deputation.
Mayor, councillor, officers, I'm David Lee and I live at 51 Hovia Terrace with a nice white picket fence and a blue weatherboard. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on item 10.3.1. It's in particular, obviously, to the Hovia Terrace, which is recorded as a single place, but is impacting 24 families. To commend the council, there's been an open and inclusive, a broad-reaching and very thorough local heritage survey process. And I know that the council have debated it many times at meetings, and there's been a number of different elements to this. But in the end, what we received out of that process was a letter saying that we're classified as Category 4. And just to remind people, that is little significance. And the description says, has elements or values worth noting for community interest, but otherwise little contribution. I recall receiving the letter, and our family were quite happy with the recognition that our house was being identified as something of character and of value in the community. And what I see in the Hovia Terrace area over the last 30 years that I've lived there is people have renovated and developed, and our house was in quite poor condition, and it was a big decision about whether to invest in renovating or whether to knock it down, as others have, my neighbour had. But the community there is very sympathetic to the streetscape, is to the heritage of the area, and I quite enjoyed reading, I think it was page, I can't remember now, of the 300-page document that actually had identified when our properties were built. And there's been some debate in the community, is ours older than yours? When's this? And I now find that our house is at least 100 years old, according to that record. The thing here is that following that initial letter of Category 4 and their subject and subsequent engagement process, it's on page 20 of the agenda, the council received no letters of concern with Category 4 from the home owners of Hovia Terrace. However, did receive 3 letters from the broader community recommending that more stringent and tighter controls should be on Hovia Terrace. And I don't think I need to repeat the comments of the former speakers. There is this disparity between the homeowners and broader community. Following the review by the independent consultant, we have now before a recommendation to modify the heritage listing to Category 2, which is defined as very important to the heritage of the locality. So we've jumped from little significance to very important, which does seem somewhat unusual given the process was so thorough in the start of this process. As I said, whilst it's listed as one change to the heritage list, it does impact 24 families. And as per Aaron, I'm not going to call it its original name, but anyway, the WhatsApp group went quite wild on Monday, and my wife rang me at work and said, "Oh, you need to have a look at this. You know, it's material. Things are changing." And certainly, when I look at the officer's report, which claims it as a minor modification to the local heritage survey in the amendments, it's really not a minor change. It's impacting a lot of people, and it's really changing what it means for them and their properties. This change to Category 2 will trigger Clause 7 of the local planning scheme, which is the heritage clause. I don't know how many have read it, but it's onerous and vague. I know that seems a little bit difficult, but it sort of has, you'll need to go and get, if you want to do any development on your property or renovation, a qualified, recognised, let me just get the words right here, prepared by a suitably qualified heritage expert. And unclear what that requirement is or what it means. It also will likely put constraints on the building design and the materials. We also have very limited, from what I can read in the planning scheme and the policies, on what the obligations of this clause actually mean. Like, it could be just swept through to the keeper, so to speak. And we did see with the church on Dyson Street some disparity between what could happen and what might not happen, and it was already Category 2 on the list, and yet there was still a proposal to knock it all down. So I do have a concern that, I'll say, what restrictions may be placed on the people might be a function of who sits in the chair across from you at the day that that decision is made. We really need to have clear guidelines if we're going to have these onerous obligations on the community. It's sort of in a vacuum at the moment, and that makes it incredibly anxious for the people in the street because they just don't know. So given the significance of the change, it was also, as previously pointed out, extremely disappointed that we received such short notice. For what the community believed, it was a 4. And all of a sudden, on Friday, when I opened the letter, it was a 2. And I couldn't find a lot of information. Unfortunately, Samantha was able to. And then I went, gee, that is really quite a significant change. So we didn't have the time. We didn't have the consultation. After a long consultation process to get it to 4, we suddenly had, oh, it's 2. Without that engagement or without any appreciation. And the letter certainly didn't say, and you'll be listed on the heritage list, and that will mean your property will be much more difficult to renovate in the future. It didn't say that. It just said, go and read the documents, 300 pages of them. So given the uncertainty of the development approval process requirements, I would ask that the council consider modifying the change to what I'll call the middle ground. So rather than have it as a 2, and we started at a 4, should the council then consider that we make it a 3? We still then recognise the value of the amenity, we recognise the streetscape, and you have residents and owners that value the streetscape. But the risk of moving to a 2 without any clarity for what that means for the people of Hovea Terrace, I think is a step too far.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr Lee. Councillors, any questions for Mr Lee this evening? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to item 10, which is the draft June reports. And I'll now hand you over to the Acting Chief Executive Officer, Mr Gary Adams, to take you through the balance of the draft June reports. Mr Adams.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.1, large-scale commercial event proposal on Sir James Mitchell Park, Nocturnal Food and Beverage Village in November 2025. The City has received an expression of interest from a commercial organisation, Nocturnal Events Proprietary Limited, to hire a portion of St James Mitchell Park in South Perth to facilitate a 3-day food and beverage village festival from 28th to 30th of November 2025. This item is referred to Council as the City of South Perth Policy P106, use of city reserves and facilities, requires large-scale events and activations facilitated by commercial organisations to be referred to Council for approval. For the reasons outlined in this report, it is recommended that the expression of interest for the Food and Beverage Village Festival be approved, subject to Nocturnal Events Proprietary Limited complying with the stated event terms and conditions.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any questions on this item? I've got two. I guess therefore, Ms Shaw, the first question relates to page 11 of the agenda, which notes that Nocturnal will need to make an application to the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions to hold this event. Do we have any idea how likely that approval is?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, it's a separate permit process with the department, so the applicants will need to make the separate application to them, and that will be considered and determined by the department.
All right, thank you. And my second question relates to page 9 of the agenda, which lists a number of requirements that Nocturnal will need to comply with, such as a noise management plan, resident notification letter, parking and traffic plan, and a waste management plan, among others. These requirements are mentioned again at page 12 as risk mitigation measures. Silly question, how will those requirements be enforced?
Thank you for the question. So the applicant would need to submit the required documentation, which the city would review and approve. Those documents will be incorporated into any future licence agreement for the event. And then separately, the city would undertake administration for enforcement and compliance. In respect to the noise requirements, there's a separate Regulation 18 requirement for an event approval, and there would be a separate independent noise technician stationed on the site. They will undertake the noise monitoring, and if there are any instances where there are breaches of the decibels that have been prescribed for the event, they'll require the noise to be turned down. If that doesn't happen, then there are breaches and there can be penalties imposed as a result of that.
Thank you very much. No further questions, councillors? Oh, Councillor Navard.
I had asked Director Shaw a couple of questions, and once again, that one at least was related to noise issues. In the explanation, it had indicated that the city planned to canvass the majority of occupiers on behalf of the CEO to ascertain whether the noise from Friday's session was acceptable to a majority of local residents and whether alternatively the noise levels had impacted local residents adversely. And I just wondered how exactly that kind of local measurement might be gained, because you can talk about decibels, but sometimes the noise levels are quite idiosyncratic, and so someone could quite possibly be experiencing extreme noise levels, and we've said that somehow the CEO is going to be in charge of having to sort that kind of an issue out. So that was my concern.
So just to clarify, Councillor Navard, what's the question that you're asking the administration?
Well, how, if the it arises that there are considerable concerns about the noise level, and our documentation indicates that the CEO will ascertain whether the noise is acceptable or not, well, how might that occur? That's all.
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So typically the sound level meters are positioned around the event. It does capture decibels. That's how it's actually recorded in accordance with the noise regulations and the tonality. There will be a prescribed limit, and that equipment will be calibrated to that and will measure what the actual noise impacts will be. We understand that it may have various impacts on adjacent residents in terms of their levels of sensitivity, but in terms of enforcement and compliance, it is in accordance with the prescribed decibels under the noise regulations.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
Item 10.1.2, RFT 6 of 2025, Operation and Management of Reuse Shop and Recycling Centre Customer Interface. This report considers the submission received from the advertising of Tender 6 of 2025 for the Operation and Management of Reuse Shop and Recycling Centre Customer Interface. The report will outline the assessment process used during evaluation of the tender received and recommend approval of the tender that provides the best value for money and level of service to the city.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Councillor Navard, on the buzzer.
Thanks. My question had been to the relevant director and just seeking an explanation about how the city considered that we'd receive a better service by blending two activities when at the moment we have one activity in place with one set of service providers. That's all.
Ms Emprema?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So obviously one of the activities is a new activity, which we're seeking an experienced external operator for. We went with the option to also have that operator run the customer interface of the recycling centre. The reason being, because it's a very small operation for the city, we have limited flexibility around staffing that facility if someone's absent or on leave or unexpected absences, particularly, and that creates challenges for us in being able to provide that the level of customer service that we would like. By putting that compatible service out with the operation of the reuse centre, we allow an operator who has a lot of resources at their disposal and the flexibility to respond to events as they happen, which the city doesn't have.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
Item 10.3.1, Draft Local Heritage Survey, Adoption. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting the Draft Local Heritage Survey following advertising.
So, folks, I've declared a proximity and financial interest in this item, so if there's going to be any questions from elected members of the administration, I feel that I should probably up and leave the room for the duration of those questions and answers. So I'll begin by asking, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Yes, we do. Okay. In that case, you need to move a motion at a council agenda briefing. Councillor Cridland, in the absence of Deputy Mayor Councillor Waugh, would you be willing to take the chair while any questions and answers on this items are made? Thank you.
All right, who wants to start the questions? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Presiding Member. I have a few questions, so I'll take this in turns with other fellow councillors for asking questions. My first question is with regard to the independent expert, the consultant that we've actually used. So from the deputations tonight, we heard comments with regard to concerns about the process, the perhaps ambiguity in the categorisation, and also the increase in categorisation of some of the properties that have been nominated. Could the administration just please provide the level of comfort and I suppose the experience that the consultant actually has in making these recommendations for us?
Director Shaw.
Thank you. We're satisfied in the level of experience from the consultant. We reviewed their credentials before appointing them, and they have extensive experience in heritage-related matters. In regards to the discrepancy, the city prepared the draft local heritage survey. So we undertook an assessment of what we considered to be an appropriate level of significance for each of the places, having regards to the recommendations that were provided on the existing municipal heritage inventory, which was guided by a former heritage consultant. Any changes that we were aware of in the time since the last review was undertaken, and having regards to the local heritage survey guidelines. As previously outlined to Council, where there was an objection or a submission received in relation to each of the proposed categories from the city, we were to engage an independent heritage consultant, which we've done, just to verify or make a separate recommendation. So in respect to the officer recommendation that's provided, we've drafted it in such a way that effectively retains all of the recommendations that the city had, and it is open to council to then adopt the additional modifications to the classification of significance as recommended by that consultant.
Further question, Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member, and thank you, Director Shaw. With regard to the changes in categorisation, so obviously from Category 4 to a Category 3 or a Category 2, and also for properties that have now made it to the list, been nominated again, may have previously been on a list, may have been removed from a list. Could you just provide a little bit of background to that, and also whether over maybe a period of time there are changes in the view as to what may be considered significant or should be considered for an increase in categorisation?
Dr. Shaw.
Thank you. So in terms of previous council decisions on the local heritage survey, they were guided by a different independent expert, but the condition of the place obviously changes over time, which can impact the recommendation. The levels of significance outlined in the local heritage survey guidelines hasn't changed over the last period, but that only provides a broad description on what are relevant considerations for the place. One thing that's probably important to note is that notwithstanding the city's or an expert heritage consultant's recommendation on a place on cultural heritage significance grounds, the Heritage Act also provides for the local government, as in the council making a decision on the local heritage survey, to make a decision on the local heritage survey based on other factors that may not be included in the local heritage survey guidelines. So in that consideration, the council of the day may have taken into consideration concerns that were raised by the owners or occupiers at the time in terms of property values or their ability to redevelop their property, etc., outside of the considerations that the administration would have put forward in terms of its recommendations. So that may account for why some places were potentially recommended and removed from the heritage list or the survey at the time, despite potentially having cultural heritage significance.
Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member, and thank you again, Director Shaw. My next question leads on to some of the comments you've actually just made. So with regard to any effect on property values or the ability to undertake substantial renovations, and tonight we heard costs of maybe 200 or 300% higher than it would be as if it was not a listed property. Can you provide some comments with regard to that, and also whether that should be given consideration with regard to this item?
Dr. Shaw.
Thank you. So Property values are not a material planning consideration, and it's not something that the city would consider as part of its recommendation on whether a place has cultural heritage significance or not. However, as I mentioned earlier, it is something that council could have regard to in considering whether it includes a place on the local heritage survey. In terms of the property values themselves, the reason that they're not typically considered a material planning consideration is because they are speculative. They change over time, depending on the market of the day, other external factors in terms of development. There are some instances where real estate agents or valuers will say that it's reduced the property value in terms of its future redevelopment potential, especially. But then there are other instances where there are reports that show that having heritage listing or being in a heritage area, can increase the value of the property as well. So because it is so speculative, it's not considered from the administration's point of view in these recommendations. In terms of the effect of the heritage list, and this is obviously the survey, not the list, having a heritage listing over your property does not prohibit the ability to redevelop the property or make additions and alterations to the property, but it does trigger the need for development approval before that could happen. So for example, if a place was not on a heritage list, it would just need a demolition permit if they were seeking to remove it. If it was on a heritage list, development approval would first be required. Approval would then need to be granted before you could demolish the property, and it may include conditions on that approval, requiring a place record be created, etc. If the fabric of the building was the reason for its heritage listing, and the applicant or the owner was seeking to do alterations or additions to the place, requiring development approval would be a means of the city being able to impose conditions or require certain design requirements that otherwise wouldn't be required where a heritage listing wasn't in place. So it could be things like ensuring the additions of materials that are compatible to the fabric of the remainder of the building, etc. So it's just a means of being able to provide an additional layer of regulatory control over that property to ensure that the heritage value of the place is maintained.
Yes, Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to see if the administration had any comments following the 4 deputations that we heard this evening, particularly around written consent from a homeowner, and if that would seem to be a reasonable element to include in this process.
Director Shaw.
Thank you. I'd probably have 2 comments in relation to the deputations. The first is the process that has been undertaken. The process is effectively prescribed in the Local Heritage Survey guidelines. So the process that the city has undertaken in respect to reviewing the survey and the consultation is standard across local governments. I can certainly appreciate the concern from residents to receive a letter that has changed the recommended classification of significance seemingly at the last minute. And unfortunately, that is the process. Where the consultant has recommended something different, we've provided that notification to the owners and occupiers prior to final consideration and adoption by council of the Local Heritage Survey. There were some comments made in respect to if a place has been upgraded per se to Category 2, that it would then be on the list. And that's also not necessarily the case, because that's a separate decision of council. So for all of the places that council resolves to include as a Category 1 or 2 in the Local Heritage Survey, the city will be putting those together to form the draft list. That draft list then goes through its own separate statutory advertising process where we'll be engaging with the owners and occupiers of those places and again seeking submissions. Council will then need to decide whether it includes those places on the list. And even if it is a 1 or 2 on the survey, council can choose not to include it in the heritage list. We've recommended that if council is seeking to not have places on the heritage list, that it is consistent with it. So if there's something that you would not want on the list at a later date, to change the category as part of the survey to reflect that for consistency. In terms of some of the other comments that were made, I think it was in respect to there was process and written consent. So some local governments, like Melville, have taken the view that unless they receive written consent from the owners, that they won't include the place in the heritage list, and that is open for this council to also do. Because as I mentioned earlier, under the Heritage Act, council can consider any other matters not set out in the local heritage survey guidelines in considering whether it adopts the list or adopts this local heritage survey. So council could form the view that another relevant consideration for the local heritage survey is whether owner's consent has been received. And it could then form the view that anything would then not be considered. And that's also fine to do. So it's open to council to either adopt the recommendations by the independent consultant about changing the categories and then not including any private property places on the heritage list, or it could also modify or remove the places from the local heritage survey now before we put forward the list. One important thing to note is that if council changes the category to a 3 or 4 for the place now, the city will only be preparing the list based on 1s and 2s, which means we would not do further consultation for categories 3s and 4s.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a sort of question not on notice, but in your view, would you say that there, across Australia, there would be some councils that do a particularly good job on this? And if so, are you able to name any that really seem to get it right?
Director Shaw.
Thanks. It's not so much to do with whether they do it right or not, because there is a prescribed process that we would follow to go through reviewing the survey. But some local governments have, I think, more of an appetite for heritage protection than others. So, for example, Fremantle, Subiaco. So it really depends on the council on whether or not it has a certain view towards private property rights, especially. I think the survey is a good means of at least capturing all the places that do or may have cultural heritage significance in the district as a potential catalogue. However, I can appreciate and understand if council chooses not to then include those places on the heritage list, because the heritage list is the document that provides the statutory protection of those places and associated controls on the property.
Councillor De Souza.
Thank you, through the chair. We've heard residents tonight ask about the various imposts which would be incurred if certain categories are adopted. Just confirming those sort of extra costs, extra regulatory burdens would be only for categories 1 and 2, and that everything under category 2 would be exempt from that?
Director Shaw.
Thank you. Not as part of this stage, because this is the local heritage survey, but if council adopted all 1s and 2s on the future heritage list, the additional cost is that you would have a requirement to make an application for development approval prior to undertaking any works to that place. So a standard development application is $147, $149. And then obviously any additional costs associated if there were controls in place in terms of the materials that would need to be used, if there were any additions, etc., to that place to make it compatible with the place listing itself. So there are additional costs associated with if an owner wants to make any additions or alterations to that property that otherwise wouldn't be there if the property was not heritage listed. There are no requirements for the city to require a landowner to either upgrade or maintain a heritage listed property unless council resolves to issue a conservation order over that property, which is a separate process.
follow-up question, Councillor
Thank you,
D'Souza.
Councillor Cridlin, and thank you, Director Shaw. So in terms of the operational difference between Cat 3 and Cat 4, is there one, or is that just sort of a judgment distinction?
Director Shaw.
It is a judgment decision. One has some and one has little significance. So it really depends on how the place has been maintained, the level of significance it contributes to the whole cultural heritage significance of the district, how it sits within its place settings. The Local Heritage Survey Guidelines provides different criteria based on whether it provides for that or not. So, but it is a judgment call.
Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering about the heritage qualifications and whether they sit within particular disciplines, because over the time that I've listened to these kinds of things, I'm aware that some people seem to argue from like a historical background in terms of giving an opinion. Some others seem to have some kind of architectural a background that informs their decision. And I therefore wonder, well, what constitutes a heritage specialist?
Director Shaw.
Thank you. So, as you pointed out, it's from different backgrounds. You could be an architect, an urban designer. If there's a particular feature of the place related to landscaping, you could be a landscape architect. If the value is in archaeological value of the place, qualifications in that. So it really depends on the consultant. We would consider whether their field is related, what recent qualifications they have, and their experience.
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. This evening we had a deputation from Mr. Lee, and comments were made with regard to the process, and you obviously noted that there was a prescribed process. So I think the comments were that there was ambiguity as to category definitions and unclear guidelines. Could the administration please assist with confirming, I suppose, the process is quite prescribed and how those determinations are made in reaching categories?
Director Shaw.
Thank you, yes. So we defer to the Heritage Council's guidelines for local heritage surveys and the recommendations for heritage listings themselves in terms of the assessment criteria. So the guidelines themselves provide recommendations on best practice for undertaking a review of the local heritage survey in terms of timeframes, call for nominations from the community, putting it out for public advertising, what should be included in a place record, what the different categories of significance should be, etc. So we follow the Heritage Council's guidelines.
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member, and thank you, Director Shaw. Specifically with regard to 2 Parker Street, that has been upgraded from a Category 4 to a Category 2, and it now appears on this survey. Could some comments please be provided with regard to the significance of that building and I suppose the characteristics, the vintage, and what other examples we may have of the same kind, type, era in the city, or is that quite a significant standalone building?
Director Shaw.
Thank you. So the city actually recommended that that be a Category 2, not a Category 4. And the independent consultant agreed with that recommendation that it should be retained as a classification of 2. The reason that they've made that recommendation is reference to the value that it had and significance to the place. And there was a request to remove reference to the architects from memory, but I can find more information for you for that specific place record and get that back to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Navard.
Do you think that, I'm just thinking about a place like Subiaco and Fremantle and then looking at ourselves, do you think that there would be any way that the residents of the City of South Perth's attitudes would in any way be more positively enhanced with any kind of additional information about the kinds of economic advantages that heritage can actually bring? Because we've heard a lot of discussion about the risks if you have a heritage property and there's going to be a high rise nearby that might bring many dollars. But we haven't looked at the other side of the coin, which might be, well, if you do have a whole strip of area that's beautifully landscaped and the houses are all delightfully, sensitively treated, that in itself can also be a financial benefit. And so if you could comment on that, that would be helpful.
Director Shaw.
Thank you. We can certainly put some information together around the benefits of having a place included in the future heritage list. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for the local heritage survey, simply because it is meant to just be a document that provides for all of the different places throughout the district that may have cultural heritage significance. And given there are no financial implications associated with the local heritage survey, it really has no implication at this point. However, as part of the recommendation for a future heritage list, or if council is considering heritage areas in particular, because that will take into consideration all owners and occupiers, regardless of whether their property is on the list, I think that's where we would put together an information sheet to distribute when we do the consultation for that process.
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. Specifically with regard to Queen Street and the deputation from Mr. Glynn this evening, there was quite a bit of discussion with regard to the importance of the photograph that was included with this nomination. For my reference and everyone's reference, can the administration please advise of whether the photograph itself is important, given that the independent consultant would have actually undertaken work separately to make a determination on categorisation?
Director Shaw.
Thank you. So for Queen Street, the City recommended Category 3. A nomination was received from the community recommending that be increased to Category 2, and the consultant has actually recommended that be Category 4. So as part of the officer recommendation, and it may not be clear through here given reference is made to the Category 2, that one we were recommending that it actually be changed to Category 4 in line with the independent consultant's recommendation. In terms of the photo itself, we can provide a newer photo, but the photo was there to demonstrate that it was an example of brutalist architecture.
I've got two questions to Director Shaw. One is, do we actually have to have any properties on the list at all?
Thank you. No. There is a requirement under the Heritage Act that the local government must have a local heritage survey. So you should theoretically have at least one place, but it doesn't necessarily have to be private property. There's also a requirement under the planning regulations that the local government must have a heritage list. But again, it's open to council to decide what places, if any, are included on that list.
Thank you. And moving to quite a different question. I noticed on page 18 of the agenda that there's a reference to a proposed change to the thematic history, and there's a reference to the South Perth Tennis Club having commenced in 1903. At least my understanding is it's 1898. having gone to its 120th birthday. And that's what its website says. And I know I wasn't alive then, but can changes to details like that be made, or through communication with the city before next week, or does it have to come through something that happens at the council meeting next week?
Thank you. Yes, this one was a little bit contentious. We had varying views. So we will have our heritage officer review that and liaise with the club, because we did receive submission from the community that it was different, and we can update that administratively based on those results ahead of the council meeting.
Thank you. Now, last chance for questions. All right, I guess it's going, gone. So we'll move on to the next item, which means that I'm relieved and the Mayor can return.
Alrighty, thank you folks. I assume we've just finished off the questions on item 10.3.1. Mr Adams, moving to 10.3.2.
10.3.2 is amendments to local planning policies. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting amendments to local planning policy 6.3, developer contributions for public art and public art spaces, local planning policy 2.4, childcare premises, and local planning policy 1.1, residential development, for the purpose of advertising.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
Excuse me. 10.3.3, revocation of local planning policies. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider revoking 2 local planning policies, which are now no longer required, following Gazettal of Local Planning Scheme number 7 and amendments to the National Construction Code.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
10.3.4, draft local planning policy 7.2, significant views, advertising. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting draft local planning policy 7.2, significant views, for the purpose of advertising.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any questions? Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just wanted to seek clarity and reassurance that this proposed policy won't impact the existing protections in place in our scheme, and also through other policies for the Salter Point area, specifically in regards to ASR 12, which is part of our scheme.
Ms Shaw, should I send that to you?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, it won't. We will have to consider the existing requirements of the scheme and the separate local planning policy in considering any development applications in Salter Point.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
10.3.5, response to notice of motion, community consultation for tree planting, tree removals. This report provides information in response to the notice of motion passed at the ordinary council meeting held 23 July 2024, titled Community Consultation for Tree Planting, Tree Removals, and presents for council's consideration a report as required on completion of the Urban Greening Grant.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any councillors on this item? Any questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For the trees that were not planted, obviously there were objections from the resident or the neighbour. Were most of those trees that were planted quite successfully planted? Did they survive, or because of the delays in the process, did we lose any of those trees?
Ms Amprima.
So the majority of trees that weren't planted where they were originally intended were planted in cities' reserves, and because they were all planted within the winter planting time frame, there wasn't any impact on their survival rates.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
With the consultation process that we undertook, which is a little bit different to what we'd ordinarily do with planting trees on verges, what sort of impact did this have on the delay in planting? And that's the first question. The second question would be, would this be proposed going forward?
Ms Anne Primo.
So in answer to the first question, obviously there was considerable amount of additional staff time went into that consultation process. But like I said in the answer to my previous question, because of the condition of the grant, we still had to complete all the planting within the winter planting programme time anyway. With respect to the second question, if we had to do that level of consultation for our entire winter planting programme, there would need to be a significant review of the amount of resources that is budgeted and allocated to that activity, because it was a fairly substantial impost on staff time.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mann. Thank you, Director Anne Primo. Just a couple of quick questions. With regard to the additional $25,000 incurred, was that a significant amount of cost with regard to external consultants and external costs, or was that a lot of the additional internal time?
Ms Anne Primo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So that's a combination of costs associated with staff time in managing the process, and some costs, particularly where we planted a tree and had to remove it. There was a direct cost from our contractor relating to that. And as you can appreciate, when you plant a tree in the ground, you plant that with mulch and fertilisers and other consumables. Those can't be recovered, so then there's a duplication in that cost.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mann. Final question for this agenda item. With regard to the process that's been adopted, obviously this would not be a good precedent to set established going forward. Can you confirm if there would be any objection to moving forward on the basis that if the administration does a tree planting program, that we could actually plant trees on verges that are city owned?
Ms Anne Primo.
So I think if I understand your question correctly, but please clarify if I've got it wrong. The city does generally seek to get agreement with residents on what it plants on the verges, but the level of consultation that was undertaken in this process and the ability for a resident to request for a tree to be removed after it was planted did create an additional resource burden. If that was something that council wished to pursue in our entire tree planting programme, then the corresponding resources would be required to be allocated through the budget process.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you again, Director Anne Primo. Just a final question. This location was identified as an urban hotspot, and obviously that's the reason why we got the grant funding in the first place. What would be the plan going forward to actually reduce that urban heat island effect for this location? Are we going to source future grants or undertake any other initiatives to reduce that heat effect?
Ms Anne Primo.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So obviously, if we can't plant trees in that location, that is our primary mechanism to reduce the urban heat island effect. So no, we wouldn't propose to do anything else in the absence of planting trees.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
Next item is 10.4.1, adoption of the annual budget 25-26 and long-term financial plan. And I think I'll give you the abridged version, given the summary of this goes over a number of pages. So This report presents the annual draft budget for 25-26 as attached for adoption by Council. It also requests Council to adopt a 10-year long-term financial plan, which will be updated on an annual basis in line with each budget cycle. To fund the services provided to the community, the City is recommending a rate increase of 2.8% for the 2025-26 draft budget, which is in line with the Perth CPI for March 2025. Last year, Council adopted a rates revenue increase of 3.4%, which was also in line with the March CPI figure. This is the 7th consecutive year where the City has kept rate rises at or below the Perth CPI figure without impacting significantly on the level of service being provided to its ratepayers. Over the past 3 months, Council has had 3 budget workshops with City officers to discuss and understand the financial position of the City and develop a budget that achieves a break-even financial position, i.e. no significant operating loss or surplus. This budget has been aligned to the principles developed and maintained in the past 3 budgets, which aimed at enabling the City to return to a sustainable operating surplus position over the short to medium term. This year's budget has total operating revenue at $86.15 million, with total operating expenditure of $86.15 million, thus forecasting a net operating break-even position. The operating budget includes just over $10 million revenue and expenditure for the Kensington Project Area Underground Power Scheme, the final project to see substantially the whole of the city undergrounded, a significant milestone. This also includes a significant capital works plan with expenditure of $31.62 million being earmarked for projects. The majority, 83% of these funds, are directed towards renewal and replacement of ageing assets. However, some new assets are also planned. This budget also proposes to increase the city's waste charge by $35 to $430 to cover the cost of transitioning from set date bulk verge collections to a pre-booked year-round verge collection service, and its waste charge remains reasonably low compared to others in the metropolitan area.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Credland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is a result of inquiries I've had from members of sporting clubs in the city, and it was in respect of whether or not there has been will be a change in any fees being charged to sporting clubs or sporting groups, in particular in respect of their continued occupation of areas that they have exclusive use of, in particular, whether under a lease or a licence. I've had a look through the schedule of fees, and I presume it's not in there, although just about everything else is, from dogs through to hiring a cone, a traffic cone, or hiring a reserve. So will there be any change to the fees, which presumably would have been licence or lease fees for tennis or croquet or bowls clubs or bridge clubs, etc., in the upcoming budget?
Who should I? Mr Lecoq? Mr Lecoq.
So, through the Mayor, there's no intent in the current budget to change those fees, but the practice to determine those fees under the existing policy would obviously continue.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Mr Adams?
So there is a body of work being conducted by city officers at the moment to review our how we manage leases and licences across the city. So there will be consultation that takes place with the clubs and other occupiers of city-owned facilities, particularly around leases. No decisions have been made in that regard yet, But obviously, if there are changes proposed to the city's leasing policy, they'll be brought to council and discussed with council, because obviously any changes will be required to be adopted by council. So there is some work done. What we're doing is reviewing how we undertake charging for particular leases, and that's an ongoing body of work. So I don't know what the outcome of it is going to be yet, but there will be some changes to the leasing policy. But there's nothing in this budget that would impose any additional fees in terms of those lease amounts at the moment.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Cridland.
So just confirming I have that right, the budget doesn't change any of the fees that would be chargeable or paid by clubs, in particular for occupation of their premises or locations, but the city is engaging in a process. However, no fees will change for clubs until council makes a decision on that.
Mr Adams.
So at the moment, we have a leasing policy in place, and all of our leases are done in accordance with that policy. We are looking at, we are doing a review of how that policy is implemented and how lease fees are calculated for occupiers of city-owned premises. So that's for leases. In terms of the budget, I would imagine there's some CPI increases in there for hiring of facilities, etc., but that doesn't apply to leaseholders. Leases, the fees that are charged on leases are in the lease agreements. So any future changes would only apply to where new lease agreements are entered into anyway. So it's, and that will be for future consideration of council with regard to the leasing policy.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
Uh, 10.4.2, listing of payments May 2025. This report presents to council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 May 2025 and 31 May 2025. For information, it also includes purchase card transactions between 1 April 2025 and 30 April 2025 in line with legislative requirements.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any questions? Nope. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
10.4.3, monthly financial statements. The monthly financial statements are provided within attachments A to I, with high-level analysis contained in the comments of this report.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
Now we're into reports from committees. So Audit Register Progress Report, third quarter update. This report provides an update on the progress of actions included in the Audit Register. The Audit Register includes all open audit findings that have previously been accepted by the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee and Council.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
Corporate Business Plan 2025-26 to 2028-29. This report presents the draft Corporate Business Plan 2025-26 to 2028-29 for consideration by Council.
Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Adams.
10.5.3, Policy Review. The terms of reference of the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee include responsibility for reviewing the city's policies. A number of policies are now presented for the consideration of the committee and referral to council for adoption.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any questions, councillors? No. Okay. All right. That brings us to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. That's nil. Item 15 is when the meeting would ordinarily be closed to the public, if there was any reason for us to do so, but there's not, so we won't. And item 16 is closure. So before I close tonight's meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and participation this evening. I declare the meeting closed at 7:38 p.m. Thank you all and good night.